What you're about to hear isn't the sanitized version found in history books or recruitment films. According to declassified military records and first-hand veteran testimonies, some of the most effective killers in the jungles of Southeast Asia never fired a single shot. They didn't need to. Their weapon was patience. Their camouflage was the forest itself. And their primary targets were not infantry patrols, but American snipers trained to believe they were the unseen ones. During covert U.S. operations across Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, the jungle quickly revealed a brutal truth: technological superiority meant very little in terrain that erased sound, swallowed movement, and punished the smallest mistake. Snipers, often deployed alone or in pairs, believed they were hunters. But many soon realized they were being hunted, stalked by men who read the jungle the way others read maps. Pay close attention to this part, because this is where the illusion of control collapses. Military after-action reports repeatedly describe a pattern that confused American units. Snipers would establish a concealed position, sometimes flawless by Western standards: elevation, wind calculation, foliage cover, only to feel an unshakable sensation hours later. Not fear. Not panic. Observation. As if the jungle itself had developed eyes. No gunfire. No movement. Just the sense of being measured. Veterans recall how silence became heavier than noise. Birds would stop calling. Insects would vanish. The air felt still, thick, almost artificial. In jungle warfare manuals, this phenomenon was often dismissed as stress. But for those who survived long enough, it was a warning sign. Someone had entered the area without being seen. The men responsible were not conventional soldiers. They were local trackers, irregular forces, and specialized units trained from childhood to read land that outsiders saw only as green chaos. They didn't track by footprints alone; rain erased those in minutes. They tracked by disturbance. A bent blade of grass facing the wrong direction. Bark scraped too cleanly from a tree. A leaf turned over, exposing a lighter underside that didn't belong there. To them, the forest was not cover. It was a living record. American snipers were trained to minimize signature: no unnecessary movement, controlled breathing, disciplined stillness. But in dense jungle, stillness could betray you. A man who didn't move for hours altered the environment in subtle ways. Sweat changed the smell of the air. Body heat affected insects. Moisture collected unnaturally on fabric and leaves. These trackers didn't rush. They circled. They waited. Sometimes for days. One Marine sniper later testified that he only realized he was compromised when he noticed something deeply unsettling: the jungle ahead of him was too perfect. No broken branches. No disturbed vines. It looked untouched, except it wasn't. That absence of disturbance meant someone had passed through with deliberate care. Someone trained to leave nothing behind. From that moment on, the sniper understood the truth. He wasn't invisible. He was outlined, not to the eye, but to the environment itself. This is where the psychological war began. Snipers depend on isolation. It sharpens focus. But isolation in hostile jungle terrain became something else entirely. It turned inward. Every sound became suspect. Every pause felt intentional. The enemy was no longer a shape and a scope; it was a presence you couldn't locate, couldn't confirm, couldn't confront. And here's the most disturbing part. These trackers didn't always intend to kill immediately. Documents and survivor accounts suggest a calculated strategy: allow the sniper to feel watched. Let paranoia erode discipline. Force small mistakes. A shift in position. A breath taken too fast. A movement made too early. The forest amplified those mistakes. In later parts of this account, we'll break down the specific methods used: the silent signals, the psychological traps, the moments where highly trained American snipers realized, too late, that the hunt had already ended. Because in this war, the deadliest predator wasn't the one who fired first. It was the one who waited. What made these jungle trackers so effective wasn't speed or strength. It was perception. While American training emphasized marksmanship, range estimation, and mechanical precision, local forces mastered something far more dangerous: environmental literacy. They didn't search for soldiers. They searched for absence, for imbalance, for things that didn't belong. US military intelligence struggled to document these techniques because, on paper, they sounded almost mythical. Reports mention trackers identifying enemy positions without visible tracks, without broken foliage, sometimes without ever approaching the sniper's location directly. To Western analysts, it seemed impossible. To the men on the ground, it was terrifyingly consistent. These trackers understood a rule that American snipers learned too late: in the jungle, the goal isn't to hide from people. It's to hide from the ecosystem. Rain erased footprints within minutes, so footprints meant nothing. Instead, trackers studied compression patterns in soil, not prints, but pressure. The way mud rebounded. The way water pooled unnaturally in shallow depressions. A boot might leave no mark, but it changed how the ground recovered. That delay told a story. Vegetation was even more revealing. A vine pulled aside and carefully replaced never returned to its original tension. A leaf brushed by fabric carried microscopic abrasions. A branch bent and released snapped back, but not perfectly. To an untrained eye, it looked untouched. To a tracker, it was a confession. Snipers were taught to move slowly. These men were taught to move correctly. They advanced with the wind, not to mask scent, but to read it. Sweat carried chemical signals foreign to the forest. Soap residue, metal, gun oil. Even fear altered human scent. Veterans later recalled being warned never to use certain detergents, not because of visibility, but because trackers could identify them days later. And then there was sound, or rather, the manipulation of it. Trackers rarely made noise themselves. Instead, they listened for what disappeared. Insects silenced by unfamiliar vibration. Birds relocating because something large and still had entered their territory. A sudden quiet wasn't peaceful. It was diagnostic. One U.S. Army sniper described the moment he knew he'd been found. He had been motionless for nearly 6 hours. No shots fired. No movement detected. Then, slowly, the jungle resumed. Birds returned. Cicadas started again. The forest relaxed. That meant the tracker had stopped moving. Which meant he was close. These men didn't rush engagement. They confirmed. They triangulated using terrain memory passed down orally for generations. Streams that shifted seasonally. Trees that fell during monsoons years earlier. American maps were outdated the moment they were printed. The trackers' maps lived in their heads. And once a sniper was identified, the hunt became psychological. Trackers would sometimes deliberately reveal partial signs of presence. A snapped twig behind the sniper. A shadow at the edge of peripheral vision. Not enough to justify relocation, just enough to seed doubt. Snipers trained to remain still now faced a choice: trust training or trust instinct. Either decision could be fatal. Staying meant exposure. Moving meant detection. This is where American doctrine failed. Snipers were conditioned to think in terms of engagement windows and kill zones. Trackers thought in terms of endurance. Who could wait longer? Who would break first? Some veterans recalled hearing subtle imitations: a bird call slightly off, a rustle that didn't match the wind. These were not signals meant to communicate. They were tests. If the sniper reacted, even slightly, the tracker learned everything he needed. In many cases, no shot was ever fired by the tracker. The sniper would withdraw, exhausted, mentally frayed, convinced he had narrowly escaped death. But the truth was colder: the tracker had already won. The position was compromised. The mission failed. Psychological dominance achieved. And in the next part, we'll go deeper into the moments when this silent war turned lethal, and how trackers transformed patience itself into a weapon that American snipers were never trained to face. American sniper doctrine was built around one sacred principle: stillness equals survival. Remain motionless.
Control breathing. Become part of the terrain. In open environments, that principle saved lives.
In the jungles of Southeast Asia, it became a liability, sometimes a death sentence.
The trackers understood something counterintuitive.
Absolute stillness was unnatural. Nothing in the jungle remains motionless for hours.
Leaves shift. Insects crawl. Small animals move through undergrowth.
When a shape refused to participate in that rhythm, it stood out not visually, but contextually.
The jungle noticed the absence of motion long before the human eye ever could.
Veteran testimonies describe how trackers exploited this. Instead of closing in immediately, they observed from a distance, mapping the sniper's behavioral patterns.
Breathing cycles. Micro-adjustments. The timing between blinks. Even the subtle tremor of muscle fatigue. A sniper holding position for extended periods created a thermal anomaly. Body heat rose. Moisture condensed differently on nearby leaves. In early mornings, fog would cling unnaturally around a human form. Trackers didn't need thermal optics. They needed patience and experience. This is where the hunt escalated.
Once the sniper's location was mentally fixed, trackers began to apply pressure, not physical force, but psychological erosion.
They manipulated time.
Hours passed with no engagement.
No confirmation.
The sniper, trained to wait for targets, now waited for an enemy who refused to appear. That waiting fractured concentration. U.S. after-action reports mention combat fatigue without contact, a phrase that confused commanders unfamiliar with jungle dynamics.
How could a sniper be compromised without ever firing a shot?
The answer lay in what prolonged uncertainty does to the human mind.
Heart rate increases. Breathing changes. Muscles tense unnecessarily. Sweat production spikes. Each of these reactions feeds the tracker more data. In some documented cases, trackers would move deliberately just far enough to be sensed but not seen. A pressure shift in the soil. A faint rustle behind foliage. Not enough to confirm direction. Just enough to trigger a stress response. The sniper faced a brutal paradox. If he relocated, the tracker followed the disturbance. If he stayed, the tracker closed the distance slowly, invisibly. There was no winning move.
One Marine sniper later described it as being stalked by time itself. He never saw his pursuer. He never heard a clear footstep. But he felt his own discipline dissolving. His mind replayed training scenarios that no longer applied. His confidence, once absolute, became conditional. And that's when mistakes happened. A hand adjusted a scope too quickly. A knee shifted against damp soil. A leaf stuck briefly to fabric, then fell. To the tracker, that was enough. When engagements did occur, they were sudden and asymmetrical. No warning shots. No exchange of fire. A single suppressed round. A blade from behind. Sometimes a booby trap placed hours earlier, activated only when the sniper finally moved. Silent. Sudden. Final. But what haunted survivors wasn't the violence. It was the realization that the moment of death had been decided long before. The shot was just a formality. The true battle had been fought in stillness, patience, and perception. Some trackers reportedly disengaged even after achieving lethal positioning. Why? Because killing wasn't always the objective. Neutralization could mean forcing withdrawal. Breaking morale. Turning elite snipers into liabilities rather than assets. American units began to notice patterns: missions aborted without contact, snipers requesting extraction without clear threats, seasoned professionals exhibiting signs of acute paranoia. The jungle wasn't just hostile terrain anymore. It was an active participant. In the next part, we'll examine how these trackers used the sniper's own training against them, converting discipline into predictability, and predictability into control. Because once your enemy understands how you think, the trigger becomes optional. By this stage of the war, something deeply unsettling had become clear to those who survived long enough to recognize it: the trackers weren't improvising. They were studying,
learning, adapting.
And most dangerously, they were learning American sniper doctrine itself. Every rule taught in sniper school, every principle meant to ensure survival, was quietly inverted.
Snipers were trained to select elevated positions with commanding views. Trackers memorized those positions by instinct.
Ridges, natural funnels, fallen trees with partial concealment, these weren't possibilities to them. They were probabilities. If an American sniper entered an area, there were only so many correct places he would choose.
Discipline created predictability.
Snipers were taught to avoid obvious trails. Trackers knew this too, which is why they watched the spaces between paths. The places that looked tactically sound to Western logic but felt wrong to the jungle.
Dry ground during monsoon season.
Clear sightlines that required unnatural vegetation trimming.
Shade where shade shouldn't exist at certain times of day. Nothing escaped notice. The trackers also understood time better than their opponents.
American snipers rotated shifts, followed extraction schedules, and operated under logistical constraints.
Trackers lived there.
They had no clocks,
no deadlines. They could wait not hours, but days. Weeks, if necessary. This asymmetry shattered the sniper's mental framework.
One veteran described realizing, far too late, that his enemy wasn't reacting to him, he was anticipating him. Every movement felt preempted. Every safe decision seemed already accounted for. It created a suffocating sense of inevitability. And then came the manipulation.
Trackers would sometimes allow snipers to think they had escaped.
A deliberate lapse in pressure. A return of natural sound. The illusion of safety.
Snipers, exhausted and dehydrated, would relax just enough to expose themselves during exfiltration.
That was the most dangerous moment.
Extraction routes were watched. Rally points memorized.
The tracker didn't need to kill the sniper in position. He could wait until fatigue stripped away vigilance.
Until relief replaced fear.
That emotional transition was fatal. In some cases, trackers used captured American equipment, boots, webbing, even cigarette brands, not as disguises, but as psychological weapons. Finding a familiar object where it shouldn't be triggered immediate dread.
Someone had been there. Someone close. Someone confident enough to leave evidence. The jungle became hostile in a new way. Not violent. Mocking. American snipers began reporting something unprecedented. They felt outmatched without ever seeing their enemy.
Their training no longer felt like an advantage. It felt like a script the trackers had already memorized.
This wasn't just tactical defeat. It was identity erosion. Snipers pride themselves on control of breath, of motion, of outcome.
But here, control belonged to the one who refused to act.
The one who waited.
The one who let the sniper's own discipline collapse under the weight of uncertainty.
Psychologists would later identify this as a form of anticipatory trauma.
The damage occurred before the threat became visible. Fear was no longer tied to an event, but to time itself.
Waiting became unbearable. Stillness became dangerous.
And by the time a sniper understood that his training had been weaponized against him, it was usually too late to adapt. In the final part, we'll step back from the jungle and confront the lasting consequences of this silent war, how it redefined military superiority, reshaped doctrine, and left scars that followed veterans long after the forest released them.
Because some battles don't end when you leave the battlefield. They follow you home.
When the war ended, at least on paper, the jungle did not release everyone who entered it. For many American snipers, the most enduring damage came not from firefights or visible wounds, but from months spent under invisible pressure. Veterans returned home carrying something difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't felt it: the certainty that being watched was more dangerous than being attacked. Military historians would later struggle to categorize what happened in those forests. There were no decisive battles.
No captured strongholds. No clear kill counts.
And yet, something fundamental had shifted. The idea that superior technology and training guaranteed dominance was quietly dismantled by men who operated without radios, optics, or modern logistics. The trackers had proven a devastating truth: superiority is contextual.
In dense jungle terrain, patience outperformed precision. Familiarity outmatched firepower.
And psychological endurance mattered more than trigger discipline. The predator who never fired could still win by forcing the enemy to abandon the hunt, doubt himself, and carry that doubt forward. Post-war interviews reveal a common pattern among sniper veterans. Many reported heightened sensitivity to silence,
discomfort in wooded areas,
and inability to relax when no immediate threat was visible. They trusted danger more than calm, because calm had once been the prelude to death.
Some described waking at night convinced someone was standing just out of sight.
Others avoided stillness entirely, preferring noise and movement to the suffocating quiet that once meant exposure.
The jungle had trained them too, just in the opposite direction.
Modern military doctrine quietly absorbed these lessons.
Sniper training expanded to include environmental interaction rather than domination. Movement patterns were diversified. Extraction protocols were revised.
The myth of the lone, untouchable sniper was replaced with a humbler understanding: no one is invisible in someone else's home terrain. But for the trackers themselves, there were no medals,
no official recognition.
Their victories were negative space missions aborted, confidence broken, fear planted.
Their success lay in what didn't happen. No shot. No sound. No trace.
Just a sniper who never felt safe again.
This is the aspect of war rarely discussed.
Not the clash of armies, but the quiet dismantling of certainty. When the enemy refuses to reveal himself, refuses to rush, refuses to play by your rules, the battlefield moves inward.
And that may be the most lasting weapon of all.
Because when the predator never fires, never appears, and never leaves evidence,
the war doesn't end with the mission.
It ends when the mind finally stops listening for the forest. And for some, it never does.